So how do you manage, it's such a dynamic, exciting, probably exhausting space. How do you continue to, on one hand, drive innovation within the bank, be in touch with the culture and the cultural transformation happening there, and then at the same time have your eyes and ears out in all these interesting organizations and startups, as well as some of your peers are probably doing some interesting things?
Yeah, I mean, like that is the big question, isn't it? And frankly, like whether it's, I mean, I think we hear a lot and see a lot about what banks are now doing, but by no means are banks the only sort of industry that's being impacted by, disrupted, you could say, by technology. If I just stick with the banking sort of industry, like banks are all trying different things, right? But ultimately, it boils down to how do you actually get much more engaged in the world around us. Like things that we've tried to do include just getting much more into trying to strike different types of partnerships. Being much more open to and friendly to doing business with smaller companies. So this whole startup technology space, startups or quote unquote fintechs that many people talk about. How do we not just get out there and get to know who they are, but also structure ourselves and work on streamlining processes and some of the big kind of big company bureaucracies that frankly small companies cannot afford to go through. Right. So how do we figure out ways of streamlining, not cut corners, but streamline some of the necessary processes and procedures in a way that smaller companies can actually navigate through and get processes that used to take 3 months down to something that can be done in a matter of days. So external partnerships with startup companies is a very important thing. One of the things that we've sort of, I would say, piloted a little bit, or it really certainly have invested quite a bit in the recent months, has been on academic partnerships, right? And I'm happy to talk a little bit more about that. Certainly in the AI space, we've done a fair bit in, here in Toronto, working with the University of Toronto, and then also now extending to one of our partnerships, which is with the University of Alberta in Edmonton, which happens to be one of the leading AI and machine learning research labs in the world. So partnerships there. A little different than working with technology startups because we're not sort of looking for a technology that we can license or buy, right, or otherwise integrate into the bank. With research, we're now talking about supporting and getting involved in the scientific discovery, if you will, right, of a field like artificial intelligence, which for banks it's kind of a foreign space to be. R&D isn't something that banks do. I mean, pharmaceuticals, chemical companies, right, technology companies have been doing that for years. For whatever reason, large financial institutions have the, sort of have the pockets to do it, but haven't actually really done very much of it in the past. Something that we're now trying. Another thing is, looking within ourselves. So, I'm not sure, sort of within the audience, who some of you may be from smaller companies, but those of you that are in larger companies, RBC has, 80,000 plus employees around the world. There's actually a lot of innovative energy, right, within the company. And so we're looking for ways of tapping into that, where in the past, we would hold a hackathon, we would have people that sort of get together in a very informal or, ad hoc way. And yet, there have been a number of really interesting discoveries and, inventions within RBC. And I like to say not so much because of the bank, but in spite of the bank, right? Some of those things have actually been able to happen. So how do we actually facilitate in making more of those things happen? So those are all,
Great stuff.
Just different ways that we've been trying to,
Right.
get at getting those new ideas into the bank. One thing that I think is pretty interesting is, and it's something that we're trying to figure out for ourselves too. For a bank like RBC, we're very used to dealing with larger technology providers, right, with larger vendors. And when you think about the AI and machine learning space, you can think about who are the big vendors that are out there that have sort of enterprise level, enterprise ready type solutions. And that's one way, right, of going after and trying to procure some of these capabilities. One of the things that we realized though was that the life cycle of these ideas typically start at research. Right? And so the closer you can get to the researcher that's on an academic campus, the more likely you're getting a newer and a sort of getting a newer idea or getting to an idea at an earlier stage. And the way that these things travel, right, is a researcher that decides to commercialize this idea into a startup company that then takes a couple of years to build. Many then disappear, but then the ones that actually work or make it end up getting acquired, sometimes by larger companies, or they themselves raise more money to grow. And then for those ones that actually do get acquired, is typically when then you get exposure to them if you were working through the larger companies, right? And so, for us, we will continue to work through some of the larger vendors that, our larger traditional partners, but we're also quite keen to see if we can actually get at some of these ideas earlier in the pipeline, right? Sometimes you're talking about years earlier by working with smaller vendors who are startup companies before they've had a chance to be sort of scooped up, or even earlier at the campus, right? On academic campuses where researchers are working on some of the earlier ideas. Obviously, the benefit of getting there earlier also is the trade-off of not having the curation over time of, whether it's venture capital investors or other large businesses or, other smart people helping you to, filter the large volume of ideas down to, the ones that actually end up making it and surviving. So that's some of the work that we're taking on ourselves to have the benefit of getting access to some of the earlier ideas.
Okay. Can you give us some examples that you're willing to share around the use of AI? Where is that going from a practical perspective, and where is it being placed?
Yeah, I mean, like there are a few different examples of things that we already have in production, right? But like before I get into some of those, like I think the notion of artificial intelligence and machine learning, you could it's almost, in fact, it is as broad as, in any space where there's a lot of data, and you believe that there is insight to be derived out of the data, AI and machine learning should be relevant. And especially with the explosion in terms of the volume and the velocity of data being generated, it's just becoming less and less feasible for human beings to be able to go through all this data using traditional sort of tools and methods. Machine learning, as it's called, like it's about getting machines to crawl through this data for you and help you identify the insights that are not obvious to the human eye, to the human analyst. And so, if you think about financial services, everything is a data stream. From, an example I can give you, when you call into a call center at the bank with RBC, we recently, I guess last year, we launched a service called Secure Voice. As you know, all your voice calls are always recorded, right? You're always given that disclaimer when you call in. It's recorded for training purposes or whatever. We've also now enabled a feature where if a client opts in, right? So the client, is given a decision to whether or not to opt in or not. But if they do opt in, we're able to record their voice, and then also using AI methods, essentially turn that voice into a biometric signature, so that the next time you call in, we're able to match that against the voice print that we have on record to be able to make sure that it is still you calling in next time, right? Because a lot of times, obviously fraudsters that try to get access to people's accounts or take over identities do so, calling into the call center. This is now one way that we're able to try to screen out illegitimate calls or fraudulent calls by comparing a voice print against, or by comparing callers against a sort of voice print that's been verified as a biometric signature. Right? So that's one where it's an application of artificial intelligence and the combination of biometrics for an identity verification use case. There's a lot of different use cases within fraud and risk management, which are really, really good sort of use cases for AI. Again, because it's all about using data to find connections and faint signals that we can go to action. And by the way, one of the points that we're always careful to point out is these things all end up being tools that are supportive of and complement the human element in the bank, right? The fraud investigation is still done by humans, but the AI enables our investigators to be much more targeted, right? To look at and then to be able to spot things that they otherwise might not have spotted, and then go and conduct the investigation, right? So there's a difference between decision making and judgment versus just data and knowledge, and that is the nuance between what AI is able to do versus what today AI is not able to do and still quite reliant on humans to be able to do.